They were the secret lovers of the most powerful men in history. They walked the marble halls of imperial palaces, draped in silks and jewels, their every whim seemingly catered for. They were showered with a life of unimaginable luxury and were privy to the innermost secrets of the Roman Empire. And yet they were prisoners. Their bodies and lives were not their own, subject to the whims of emperors who held the power of life and death in a single breath. They could be subjected to unimaginable cruelty, their fates hanging entirely on the desires of their masters. Hollywood and popular fiction love to show us the scandals of ancient Rome, the wild parties, and the whispers of forbidden affairs. But this sensationalism often misses the true and far more tragic story. This isn't just a tale of same-sex romance in the ancient world. To see it that way is to project our modern ideas of love onto a civilization that played by a completely different set of rules. This is the untold story of the male companions who served Roman emperors. A world where absolute power didn't just corrupt, it consumed. It's a story of deep affection set against a backdrop of terrifying exploitation. A story where the lines between a cherished companion and a prized possession were deliberately and often violently blurred. For these young men, whose names have been largely erased from history, love and devotion often led to personal tragedy. What was life truly like for these individuals, silenced by the centuries? They lived at the very heart of power, yet had none of their own. Their existence exposes the darkest contradictions of the Roman world, where civilization and cruelty, love and bondage were tangled together. Their story is a chilling reminder that in the shadow of the throne, the human heart itself could become just another territory to be conquered. To understand the tragic lives of these imperial companions, we first have to shed our 21st century lens and step into the Roman mind. Our modern concepts of sexuality, homosexual, heterosexual, bisexual, would have been pretty meaningless to a Roman. They didn't categorize desire by the gender of a partner, but by the social dynamics of the act itself. For the Romans, the most important question wasn't man or woman, but dominant or submissive. The bedrock of Roman male identity was a concept known as virtus. This term, where we get virtue, meant much more than just morality. Virtus was the essence of Roman manliness, courage, self-control, and above all, dominance. A true Roman man, a citizen, was expected to be the master of his desires and the active, controlling force in all his interactions, including sexual ones. His virtus was proven by his ability to penetrate, to conquer, to be the one in power. Because of this, a freeborn Roman citizen could have sexual relationships with a wide variety of partners without much social stigma. As long as he maintained this dominant role, his partners could be his wife for procreation. They could be female slaves, prostitutes, or entertainers, people of low social standing over whom he naturally held power. And yes, they could also be men. A Roman citizen could freely have sex with other males, as long as those males were of a lower class. Slaves, former slaves known as freedmen, or foreigners, as long as the citizen was the active partner, his virtus was safe. The real scandal, the ultimate source of shame, was for a Roman citizen to take the passive, receptive role. To be penetrated was to be feminized. It signaled a lack of self-control, and in the Roman political mind, if you couldn't govern your own body, you couldn't govern the state. An accusation of sexual passivity was one of the most powerful political insults in Rome. Historians like Suetonius and Tacitus are filled with examples of powerful men being slandered with claims that they enjoyed being submissive. Julius Caesar himself was dogged his whole career by rumors that as a young man, he'd been the passive lover of a foreign king. Whether true or not, the smear was designed to paint him as un-Roman, as lacking the core virtus needed to lead. It's in this rigid world of power and status that the figure of the male concubine or concubinus emerges. Now, this is important. The term concubinus was informal. Unlike a female concubine, the concubina, who had a semi-formal status in Roman law, the concubinus had no legal standing at all. In almost all cases, he was a slave. He was property. These young men were often chosen for their beauty, sometimes from a young age, and carefully groomed for their role. They might be educated in literature and music, trained to be charming companions. They were luxury items, living proof of their master's wealth and taste. They might wear fine clothes and live in opulent surroundings, but this shiny veneer hid a brutal reality. They had zero agency. Their bodies weren't their own. They could be used, sold, or thrown away at their master's whim. The poet Martial wrote with casual cruelty about these beautiful boys who served wine at parties and were expected to be available for their master's pleasure later. Their lives were a performance, their entire existence defined by another's desire. What, after all, could be a greater display of dominance than to own the beauty of another man? This was the gilded cage these male concubines lived in, a life lived on a knife's edge, where survival depended on pleasing a master whose slightest displeasure could mean utter ruin. If one story captures the dizzying heights a male companion could reach, it's the tale of Emperor Hadrian and his beloved Antinous. Their relationship has echoed through history, a powerful example of what seemed to be genuine love inside Rome's brutal power structure. But even here, in the most romanticized imperial relationship of all, the undercurrents of tragedy and the emperor's absolute power are always there. Hadrian, who ruled from 117 to 138 AD, was one of Rome's most complex and brilliant emperors. He was an intellectual, a poet, an architect, and a military strategist. He was also a perpetual traveler, obsessed with visiting every corner of his vast empire. A passionate admirer of Greek culture, it was during his travels in Bithynia, in modern-day Turkey, that he met a local Greek youth named Antinous around the year 123 AD. We know very little about Antinous' early life, but he was likely a teenager when he entered Hadrian's circle. By all accounts, he was exceptionally beautiful and intelligent. Soon, he became the emperor's constant companion, his favorite. Antinous was swept into the imperial world, traveling with Hadrian from the deserts of Egypt to the misty frontiers of Britain. He was given a life of extraordinary privilege and was likely well educated as part of the emperor's retinue. He hunted with the emperor, dined with him, and was always at his side. While their bond reflected the Greek tradition of an older man mentoring a youth, the evidence suggests the connection between Hadrian and Antinous went deeper. Ancient sources speak of a visible and profound affection between them. Hadrian, a man in his late 40s, seems to have been completely captivated. For Antinous, a provincial boy, this was a life beyond imagination, admired and protected by the most powerful man on earth. But he was still powerless. His entire world depended on the emperor's affection. This unequal paradise ended suddenly in the autumn of 130 AD. While sailing up the river Nile, Antinous drowned. The official story was a tragic accident, but rumors swirled immediately. The historian Cassius Dio, writing decades later, offered two other theories. One that Antinous, knowing his youth was fading, chose suicide. The other, more sensational theory was that he sacrificed himself in a magical ritual to prolong Hadrian's life. We'll never know the truth. Was it despair, sacrifice, or just a young man falling overboard? The mystery only adds to the tragedy. What we do know for sure is what happened next. Hadrian's reaction was unlike anything the Roman world had ever seen from an emperor. He was utterly devastated. He wept openly and extravagantly, a public display of grief considered deeply un-Roman for a ruler expected to show restraint. But his mourning went far beyond tears. He used his absolute power to express his grief in ways that would reshape the empire. He ordered a new city founded on the banks of the Nile, where his lover had died, Antinopolis, the city of Antinous. But then came the most shocking act of all. Hadrian declared that Antinous was a god. He created a formal cult for his worship, with priests and temples. Coins were minted with the young man's face. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of statues and busts of Antinous were commissioned and sent across the Roman world, showing him as the new god, Osiris Estinus. This was unheard of. While emperors had deified family members, no one had ever elevated a non-royal favorite, a provincial boy, a concubine, to godhood. It was a stunning display of both Hadrian's grief end his power. He was forcing the entire Roman Empire to mourn with him, ensuring the name and face of his beloved would never be forgotten. The story of Hadrian and Antinous represents the absolute peak of a companion's experience, a life of genuine affection, ending in an honor beyond imagination. And yet, it's still a tragedy. It's the story of a young life cut short and a powerful man's desperate, world-altering attempt to defy death itself. It proves that even when rooted in something like love, the relationship was ultimately defined by power. The power to elevate, to mourn, and to turn a mortal man into an immortal god. If Hadrian and Antinous represent the idealized dream of a male companion's life, then the story of Emperor Nero plunges us into its darkest nightmare. Here, the dynamic of power and desire twists into a grotesque theater of cruelty and madness. Nero's relationships with his male favorites, especially a young man named Sporus, show what could happen when an emperor's whims were unrestrained by law, morality, or sanity. Nero, who ruled from 54 to 68 AD, is one of history's most infamous tyrants. He began his reign with promise, but fell into paranoia and self-obsession. In 65 AD, in a fit of rage, he reportedly kicked his pregnant wife, Poppaea Sabina, to death. According to Roman historians, Nero was consumed by a bizarre remorse that curdled into a horrifying obsession. He found a young boy, or freedman named Sporus, who bore a striking resemblance to his dead wife. But for Nero, a simple resemblance wasn't enough. He sought to transform Sporus, to physically and symbolically mold him into a replacement for the empress he'd murdered. In an act of supreme cruelty, Nero ordered Sporus to be castrated. This horrific mutilation was meant to preserve the boy's youthful, feminine features and make him a permanent, powerless substitute for a woman. Nero's delusion didn't stop there. He decided to marry Sporus. A formal public ceremony was held, complete with a dowry and a bridal veil. Sporus was officially wed to the Emperor of Rome. From then on, Nero treated Sporus as his empress, dressing him in fine imperial regalia and demanding that others address him as lady or empress. He was paraded through the streets, a living, mutilated symbol of the emperor's absolute and perverse power. The Roman elite were horrified. This was far beyond the accepted norm. The castration was barbaric, and the public marriage was a shocking mockery of a sacred Roman institution. A dark joke, recorded by Cassius Dio, circulated in the city, that the world would have been better off if Nero's own father had taken such a wife, meaning Nero would never have been born. But Sporus wasn't Nero's only male wife. In another, even more scandalous display, Nero married a freedman from his household named Pythagoras. But in this ceremony, the roles were reversed. Nero himself played the part of the bride, wearing the veil and submitting to Pythagoras as his husband. For the Roman public, this was the ultimate crime. An emperor, the embodiment of virtus and dominance, willingly taking the passive female role, was an act of profound disgrace. It was a sign that the moral order had completely collapsed. These two marriages perfectly illustrate the terrifying world of an imperial favorite under a ruler like Nero. Sporus' story is a nightmare of exploitation. He wasn't a companion, he was a human doll, violently reshaped to fit the emperor's broken psyche. And Nero was overthrown and committed suicide in 68 AD. Sporus' ordeal wasn't over. He had become a notorious figure, a living trophy of Nero's depravity. He was immediately claimed by the Praetorian prefect Nymphidius Sabinus, who also treated him as a wife. After Sabinus was killed, Sporus was taken in by Otho, one of the emperors in the chaotic Year of the Four Emperors. Finally, when Otho fell, the next emperor, Vitellius, planned a final public humiliation, forcing Sporus to play the role of a victim in a mythological rape scene during a gladiatorial show. Faced with this horrifying end, Sporus, who had endured so much, finally found agency in the only way left to him. Before he could be dragged into the arena, he took his own life. Sporus' story is the terrifying opposite of Antinous'. It's a portrait of a life defined by complete powerlessness. He was physically altered, publicly paraded, passed between powerful men like property, and ultimately driven to suicide. His life shows the absolute worst-case scenario for a male companion, to be the object of an emperor's obsession, where love was just another word for possession and cruelty was the ultimate expression of power. While the extreme tales of emperors like Hadrian and Nero grab our attention, it wasn't just the emperors. Across the upper echelons of Roman society, wealthy and powerful men kept male companions. Zooming out from the palace reveals a broader system of desire and exploitation, and the precarious daily life of these young men. For a young, beautiful slave, being chosen by an elite master could seem like a ticket to a better life. The alternative was often grueling labor in the mines or on a farm, a life that was short and brutal. In contrast, a favored companion lived in relative comfort. He would reside within the master's home, a world of mosaics, frescoes, and lavish banquets. He'd be spared hard labor and instead trained in skills designed to please: literature, music, or witty conversation. He was, in a sense, a living work of art, a status symbol reflecting his master's culture and wealth. But this gilded comfort was full of peril. The male companion occupied a deeply uncertain place in the household. He was a slave, yet he enjoyed an intimacy with the master that others, maybe even the legal wife, could not. This made him a target. He could inspire intense jealousy from the master's wife or be despised by other slaves who envied his position. The Roman household was a complex web of power, and he was often caught in the middle. His survival depended entirely on keeping the master's favor. A wrong word, or simply the master's growing boredom, could mean his downfall. As he aged and his youthful beauty faded, his position grew even more dangerous. The relationship with a concubinus was subject to the master's whim. He could be demoted, sold, or cast out entirely. The story of Sporus, being passed from Nero to his successors, is a stark imperial example of a common reality. These men were property. They could be bought, sold, and inherited. It's easy to imagine a will listing a favorite companion right alongside prized horses or valuable silverware, a cherished possession to be passed to an heir. Other emperors illustrate this spectrum of experiences. The Emperor Caligula was infamous for his sexual excesses. While the stories are likely exaggerated, they paint a picture of a court where the emperor's desires were law. In that world, the lives of his favorites would have been subject to his violent and unpredictable impulses. Centuries later, the Emperor Elagabalus scandalized Rome in a new way. A Syrian priest king, Elagabalus openly flaunted his relationships with men. He took a chariot driver named Hierocles as his husband and reportedly loved being called Hierocles' queen. He even allegedly sought out doctors to perform sex reassignment surgery. While often dismissed as another mad emperor, Elagabalus' story shows a ruler who actively rejected Roman norms of masculinity. But for his lovers, it still meant being part of a public spectacle, their relationship a tool in the emperor's shocking defiance of Roman tradition. Ultimately, the thread connecting all these men, from the imperial favorite to the anonymous slave in a senator's villa, was their total lack of legal protection or agency. The Roman legal system, so detailed in other areas, was silent on the male concubine. He existed in a legal void. While a female concubine had some recognized status, he had none. He was a possession, an object of desire, a status symbol. His life was defined by this inescapable fact. Whether he was adored and deified like Antinous or mutilated and tormented like Sporus, his fate was never his own. It was forever tied to the desires, affections, and cruelties of the powerful man who owned him. The marble statues and whispered scandals that survived the Roman Empire offer a fragmented glimpse into the lives of male concubines. We see the serene, godlike face of Antinous, immortalized by an emperor's grief. We read the shocking accounts of Sporus, transformed into a tragic caricature of an empress by a tyrant's madness. These stories have often been treated as mere anecdotes, proof of Roman decadence. But to leave it there is to miss the devastating human reality at their core. In the end, this isn't really a story about sexuality as we understand it. It's a story story about power. In a world built on a rigid hierarchy of dominance and submission, sex was just another language to express that power. For an emperor, a man with absolute control over millions, that language could create and destroy in the most intimate of ways. The imperial bedroom wasn't a private space. It was a stage where the emperor's authority was enacted in its most raw, personal form. The stories of individuals like Antinous and Sporus have been buried for centuries, dismissed as scandalous footnotes, but their experiences tell a crucial part of Roman history. If you believe these forgotten histories deserve to be told, and that understanding the past requires us to look into its darkest corners, please consider subscribing. Your support helps us continue to unearth and share more of these untold tales from the ancient world.